Rachel Reeves off to Washington, D.C. today, but she's not going to get much good news when she gets there, I don't think, is she?
No, I think she's in denial, Mike. Her people are briefing this morning that the UK is a beacon of economic stability. Of course, that's what we all want. We all want our economy to do well. We all want the lives and livelihoods of people in this country to improve. But if you look at what the IMF is actually saying, if what they're saying is three things. The first thing they're saying, Mike, is that they were far too pessimistic globally about the impact of Trump's tariffs. Tariffs, of course, are up, but Trump's been engaging in a lot of kidology and sort of arm twisting in negotiation, and the impact on global growth of his tariffs is now going to be less than previously expected. Still negative in the round, but less than expected. The second thing they're saying is that in the UK, in particular, inflation, cost of living increases, has become entrenched. UK inflation is now set to be easily the highest in the G7 this year and next, and much higher than the IMF previously predicted. They're saying UK inflation this year is going to average 3.4%. Now, everyone listening to this will think, 3.4%? Are you telling me living standards have only gone up by 3.4% this year? Pull the other one, it's got bells on. But the official numbers are going to say, according to the IMF, that inflation in this country is the worst in the G7, which makes it much more expensive for the government to borrow money, undermines the public finances. The third thing the IMF is saying, despite the headlines that many other media outlets are going completely mad about, we're going to grow fantastically well, what the IMF is saying, if you look at the fine print, is that growth per head, the expansion of the economy per person in the economy, given that the population is rocketing for reasons that we know, is actually going to be easily the lowest in the G7. And it's growth per head, that's where the rubber hits the road. That's what people really feel. So with the best will in the world, I want the British government to do well. I want us to pull out of this nosedive that the economy is in. But on the one hand, you've got the Chancellor going to the IMF, shouting the odds that the British economy is in great shape and we're a beacon of economic stability. On the other hand, you've got people at the Bank of England saying, out the side of their mouth, that Britain at the moment, and I hate to say this, Mike, is heading for a recession.
Yes, well, I mean, no question about it. And when we talk about standards of living and cost of living and all of that, and you and I have mentioned this before, that, when we get a figure of 3.4% for inflation, it's so much more than that, isn't it? I mean, I'm looking at a story this morning in the Telegraph about Charlie Bigham, the chef who produces ready meals for people. He's saying, as a result of how much it's costing to go out for dinner, he can now say that he's going to raise his own prices, and in certain Waitrose branches, you can spend as much as $29.95 for a pre-prepared beef Wellington, $19.95 for a salmon Wellington, and $16.95 for a coq au vin. I know these are quite expensive meals, and they're not the sort of thing that every average person would buy, but it's a hell of a lot to pay for something that you have to just basically buy in the supermarket, take home, put in a microwave. 30 quid.
We all know living standards are going up. We all know that you pop into a supermarket for a few bits and pieces on a Tuesday night and you've dropped 100 quid and the fridge looks exactly the same at the end of the meal as it did before you spent the 100 quid. A lot of this comes down, Mike, to energy costs. If you go back to these IMF numbers that have come out today, it's their World Economic Outlook. It's once every 3 to 6 months, the IMF's economists over in Washington, they do a big stock take of the global economy. It's always worth having a look at. And what it's saying is that the reason British living standards are going up so much is energy. Which G7 country's got the lowest inflation at the moment? The French. Why? Because the French have got a load of nukes and the French aren't doing net zero nearly to the extent that we are. US inflation is much lower than the UK, despite the inflationary impact of those tariffs by Donald Trump, again, because their energy costs are so much lower. I do get a sense from the government, just a sense, I may be being over-optimistic, Mike, that they are starting to smell the coffee when it comes to net zero. They're starting to realise that Ed Miliband is actually an outlier, is actually pretty dangerous, a zealot when it comes to this. And if they do want to improve the environment, and we all want to improve the environment, if you keep jacking up energy costs, if you keep massively bunging loads of money to your mates in the green lobby, the subsidies and those, green entrepreneurs are then bunging your own party loads of money, which is basically what's happening, then you're going to lose the goodwill of the general public when it comes to these issues. And people are going to come along and say, you know what, forget the environment. We can't even think about the environment. Energy costs are too high. And that would be a step back as well. We're going to lose the whole argument. Labour have got to realise this. Unless net zero starts producing what it always said it would produce, cheap energy. But the reality, Mike, despite what Ed Miliband says out there in cloud cuckoo land, green energy, certainly at the moment, is not cheap energy, because we have got the highest share of renewables in our energy mix of any major economy in the world, and yet we've got easily the most expensive energy, Mr. Miliband.
Yeah, it's absolutely bonkers, crazy. Let's have a quick look at what Rachel Reeves was saying this very morning. A couple of slip-ups in what her answers were here.
There are tax rises coming down the track.
Yeah, but I think that this government are making... in terms of the ambition of this government, it is big.
But you agreed, yes, there are tax rises coming down the track.
I was really clear during the general election campaign, and we discussed this many times, that I would always make sure that the numbers add up.
Can you promise the British people you're not going to get stuck in a doom loop of having to go through this cycle every year of having to find more tax to fill the black hole?
Nobody wants that cycle to end more than I do, Sam. That's why that is why we're putting all the effort into growing our economy, because that in the end is what brings in the tax revenues to be able to afford to keep taxes low.
Interesting that she kind of initially says yes to more tax rises, and before kind of trying to cover herself, and then later kind of admits that, yeah, we are in a bit of a doom loop. You know, has Rachel Reeves suddenly decided to start telling the truth?
Look, these guys ideologically have no idea about how economies actually work. You know, as far back as the immediate post-war period, it was Winston Churchill who said, you know, you can't tax your way to growth. Trying to tax your way to growth, Mike, is like a man standing in a bucket and trying to pull himself up. And yet when there's a gap in the public finances, all Labour can do ideologically is raise taxes. They can't think about, oh, maybe we should spend a bit less. And they say that they want growth. They're giving lip service to growth. And yet their taxes, their increases, a £40 billion tax increase we saw last October, that's led to a huge decline in hiring, that employer national insurance rise. We've seen also Labour's Employment Rights Bill coming in, taking us back to the 70s. You know, unfair dismissal rights, sick leave, maternity, paternity leave rights from day one, massive increase in trade union power. That's Angela Rayner's bill. That's going through Parliament. No signs of that being watered down, despite her political demise for now. That is going to slow down hiring and growth. We've seen plunging investment in this country, unfortunately. Again, I don't like to talk the economy down, but we are taking the UK into a doom loop. We are driving the economy over a cliff. Financial markets can see it, Mike. That's why our government is spending well over 100 billion quid a year on debt interest. Far higher borrowing costs than any other G7 economy. Far higher borrowing costs than Greece, Spain and Italy. You know, these aren't paragons of fiscal virtue, these countries. Right. The weather and the food's a lot better than it is here. They're not known for their fiscal prudence, and yet we are now paying more to borrow. And faced with a hole in the public finances, she needs to get real. She needs to say, look, we're going to lower corporation tax. We're going to make it easier to take people on. We're going to give tax incentives for growth without constantly piling more and more tax on the productive part of the economy, almost as a kind of ideological fetish. The state must be bigger. We know best. Everyone else is evil. We have the right ideas. They don't. No one agrees with them outside their tiny bubble. And in particular, Mike, financial markets don't agree with them. And in the end, that is what counts, because financial markets, the big insurers, investors, pension funds that lend governments serious money, 10, 15 billion quid a month, a lot of that borrowing going to debt interest payments, of course, they'll just keep jacking the prices. And she will be forced to eat her words via a whole amount of pain. I don't like to be overly negative, but I'm afraid that's where we are.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. We are where we are, and it's up to people like you and I, Liam, to point that out to everybody else. It's not being negative, it's just being realistic, and that's really, unfortunately for them, where, as you say, we are. Liam Halligan, columnist at Telegraph, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed.